The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, and Detective James Reeves had begun to think it might never stop. He stood outside the brownstone on Ashford Street, watching water cascade off the brim of his wool coat and pool in the cracks of the sidewalk. January in the city always felt like this, gray and endless, the kind of weather that made you forget what warmth felt like. The street was empty except for a single car passing slowly, its tires hissing against wet pavement. James had been a cop for 12 years, long enough to know that death always came with paperwork, questions that had no good answers, and the particular smell of grief that lingered in doorways long after he'd left. Long enough to develop a script for moments like these, words that were supposed to offer comfort but mostly just filled the terrible silence that followed tragedy. This was a notification visit, the worst kind. He checked the address one more time, apartment 3B, and pressed the doorbell. Somewhere inside, a melody chimed, bright and incongruous. James waited, rehearsing the words he'd said too many times before, words that never got easier no matter how often they left his mouth. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your brother was found this morning. No signs of foul play. We believe it was an overdose." The door opened and James looked up from his notepad. For a moment, he forgot the script entirely. The man standing in the doorway was tall, 6'1", maybe 6'2", with dark hair that fell just past his ears in soft, careless waves. He wore a faded gray sweater that hung loose on his frame, the sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms that spoke of quiet strength. His eyes were the color of sea glass, that particular shade of green that held shadows underneath, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights, too much worry carried alone. He looked like someone who'd been beautiful once before something broke inside him. And he still was beautiful, James realized with an uncomfortable jolt of awareness, but it was the kind of beauty that came with scars you couldn't see. "Can I help you?" The voice was gentle, careful, modulated with the kind of control that came from years of managing other people's emotions. James cleared his throat and pulled out his badge, the leather holder worn smooth from a decade of use. "I'm Detective Reeves, James Reeves. Are you John Carver?" He watched the man's expression shift just slightly, but James had learned to read micro-expressions the way other people read text. Recognition flickered first, then understanding, then a resignation so profound it made James's chest tighten. "I am." John's hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening slightly. "This is about Danny, isn't it?" James nodded slowly. "May I come in?" John stepped aside without a word, and James entered a space that felt immediately different from the other apartments he'd visited on notification duty. This wasn't just a place to sleep and eat. This was a home. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and something herbal, lavender maybe, or chamomile. Books lined every wall, stacked on shelves that climbed from floor to ceiling, spilling over onto side tables and windowsills. Titles ranged from psychology texts to philosophy to dog-eared novels that looked like they'd been read multiple times. A piano sat in the corner by the window, its surface covered with sheet music, some printed, some handwritten in careful notation. Plants hung from macrame holders near the windows, their leaves lush and green despite the winter light. A worn leather couch faced a fireplace that held candles instead of logs. Photographs covered the mantel, John with an older couple, probably his parents, John with a younger man who had the same eyes and similar smile, that same young man at various ages, his progression marked in silver frames. This was the home of someone who thought carefully about the world, who surrounded himself with things that meant something, who created beauty and order as a bulwark against chaos. James recognized it because his own apartment was the opposite, sparse, functional, devoid of personality. He told himself it was because he was busy, because he moved around too much to get attached to things. But standing here in John's carefully curated space, he understood it was because he was afraid. Afraid that creating a home meant admitting you wanted to stay somewhere with someone, and staying meant you could lose it all. "Sit, please." John gestured to the couch, his voice still carefully controlled. "Can I get you anything? Water, tea? I just made coffee." "I'm fine, thank you." But John didn't sit. He stood by the window, arms crossed over his chest like he was physically holding himself together. The gray light from outside cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more tired. "Just tell me," he said quietly, "please." James had done this 100 times, but something about the way John stood there, braced for impact, already grieving even before James confirmed what he knew, made the practiced words stick in his throat. "Your brother Daniel was found this morning at the Riverside Motel on the west side of the city." James kept his voice gentle but clear. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Carver. It appears to have been an overdose. We're waiting on the toxicology report, but the responding officers found drug paraphernalia at the scene. The medical examiner believes it was fentanyl, most likely. He was clean, John's voice cracked on the word, the control finally breaking. He'd been clean for 8 months, 2 weeks and 4 days. He called me every morning at 7 to check in, every single morning. James said nothing. He'd learned long ago that there was no right response to that kind of pain, no words that could make the impossible make sense. John turned away, pressing his forehead against the cold glass of the window. His shoulders shook once, twice, then went still. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier but emptier, like he'd pulled the professional mask back on through sheer force of will. What happens now? The medical examiner will need to perform an autopsy. Standard procedure. The body will be released in a few days, usually 3 to 5. There will be some paperwork identifying him officially, making arrangements. James pulled a pamphlet from his pocket, one of the generic grief resources the department provided. If you need help with funeral arrangements or counseling services, there are some contacts in here. John laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm a grief counselor, did you know that? I help people through this exact thing every single day. I sit in my office and I listen to them talk about loss, and I tell them it's okay to fall apart, that grief isn't linear, that they need to be gentle with themselves. He turned from the window and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. And I have absolutely no idea what to do with this. Isn't that ridiculous? No, James said quietly, it's human. Something in John's expression shifted at that, a softening, maybe, or recognition. Thank you for coming in person, most people just call. I don't like doing this over the phone. That's kind of you. John walked him to the door, moving like someone much older than he appeared, weighted down by invisible things. As James stepped into the hallway, John added, Detective. James turned. John's voice wavered, then steadied, if there's anything else you find out, anything that might help me understand why, after all this time, after being so good for so long, the words failed him. Would you let me know? James pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it over. Their fingers brushed as John took it, and James felt something spark, subtle, unexpected, completely inappropriate given the circumstances. He pulled his hand back quickly, professional mask firmly in place. My direct line, James said. You can call anytime, day or night, I mean that. Thank you, John whispered, looking down at the card like it was a lifeline. James nodded and walked away, but he felt John's gaze on him all the way down the hall, heavy with grief and something else he couldn't quite name. 3 days later, James found himself back on Ashford Street. He'd told himself it was professional courtesy. The toxicology report had come back, and John deserved to hear the details in person rather than through a cold, clinical letter from the medical examiner's office. But as he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, James knew he was lying to himself. He wanted to see John again. The realization made him uncomfortable. James had built his life on clear boundaries, professional distance, emotional walls that kept him safe from the kind of pain he'd seen destroy other cops. He didn't get personally involved with victims' families. He didn't think about them after the case was closed. He certainly didn't find himself driving across the city on his day off to deliver information that could have been sent via email. But here he was. John answered the door in running clothes, fitted black joggers and a moisture-wicking shirt that clung to his torso, face flushed and damp with sweat. His hair was tied back in a small knot, and there was a sheen of exertion on his skin that made him look younger, more vital. Detective, surprise flickered across his face. I wasn't expecting you. I have the toxicology report, James said, holding up the manila envelope. I thought you'd want to know what it said. John's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like gratitude. Come in, please, I just got back from a run, give me a minute to clean up. Of course. While John disappeared into the bedroom, James wandered over to the piano. The sheet music on top was different from last time, new pieces, handwritten in that same careful notation. He picked up one of the pages, studying the musical phrases. The title at the top read Elegy for What's Lost. Do you play? James turned. John stood in the doorway of the bedroom, now wearing dark jeans and a soft blue Henley that made his eyes even more striking. His hair was still damp, pushed back from his face, and James caught the scent of soap and something citrus, bergamot maybe. Not really, James admitted, setting the music down carefully. My mom tried to teach me when I was a kid, but I didn't have the patience for it. She used to say I had too much energy and not enough focus. Patience is overrated. John crossed to the piano and sat down, patting the bench beside him. Sometimes you just need to feel the music. Here, sit. James hesitated, then joined him on the bench. Their knees almost touched, and James was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from John's body, the way the small space forced them into proximity. John's fingers moved over the keys, pulling out a melody that was both melancholy and hopeful, minor chords that resolved into something brighter, like dawn breaking after a long night. The music filled the apartment, transforming it, and James watched John's hands with something close to fascination. There was grace in the way he played, a fluidity that spoke of years of practice and genuine love for the instrument. "That's beautiful," James said when the last note faded. "Did you write it?" "For Danny, a few years ago when he first got clean." John's jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath skin. "I called it second chances, I thought." He trailed off, shaking his head. James pulled the envelope from inside his coat. "The report confirms it was fentanyl mixed with heroin. The concentration was extremely high, much higher than street heroin typically is. The medical examiner believes your brother likely didn't know what he was taking. He probably thought it was just heroin if he'd relapsed, but it was cut with enough fentanyl to be lethal within minutes." John took the envelope but didn't open it. His hands were shaking slightly. The only outward sign of the emotional storm James suspected was raging inside him. "So he didn't mean to die," John said quietly. "He just made one mistake." "It looks that way, yes." "One mistake?" John laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a bitter understanding. "That's all it takes in the end, isn't it? One moment of weakness, one bad decision, and everything you fought for, everything you built, all the progress you made gone just like that." "It wasn't your fault." "I know that." John set the envelope on the piano without opening it. "Logically, intellectually, professionally, I know that. Addiction is a disease. Relapse is part of the disease process. No one could have prevented this except Danny himself, and even then if he didn't know what he was taking." He trailed off, pressing his palms against his eyes. "But knowing something and feeling it are two entirely different things, aren't they?" James understood that better than most people realized. He'd spent years building walls around himself, convincing himself that emotional distance was strength, that not needing anyone meant he couldn't be hurt. He knew, intellectually, that he was isolating himself, that human connection was important, that love was worth the risk. But knowing it didn't make it any easier to act on it. "You said you're a grief counselor," James said. "How do you do that job without falling apart? How do you sit with other people's pain all day and not take it home with you?" John lowered his hands and looked at him, really looked at him, and James felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and strangely compelling. "Who says I don't?" John's voice was soft, honest. "I take it home every single night. I carry their stories, their losses, their questions that don't have answers. I lie awake thinking about the mother who lost her child, the widower who doesn't know how to cook for one, the teenager trying to understand why his best friend took his own life." He paused. "I fall apart regularly. I just do it privately where no one has to see it." The honesty of it struck James like a physical blow. Here was someone who helped others carry their pain while carrying his own, someone who showed up for broken people even when he was breaking, someone who understood that strength wasn't about not feeling things, it was about feeling them and continuing anyway. "I should go," James said, but he didn't move. "You don't have to," John's voice was careful, offering without pushing, "unless you want to." James knew he should want to, should thank John for his time, walk out the door, maintain the professional boundaries that kept his life neat and manageable. But sitting here in the quiet warmth of John's apartment, close enough to feel the rise and fall of his breathing, James realized he was tired of doing what he should do. "I don't want to," he admitted, and the words felt dangerous and liberating in equal measure. John smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "Then stay, I'll make coffee or something stronger if you're off duty." "I'm off duty." "Good." John stood and offered his hand. "Come on." James took it, letting John pull him up from the bench, and for a moment they stood close enough that James could count the lighter flecks of gold in John's green eyes. Then John stepped back, the moment breaking, and led the way to the kitchen. They talked until well past midnight. James learned that John was 34, 2 years younger than him, that he'd become a grief counselor after losing their parents in a car accident when he was 23, a drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time, the kind of senseless tragedy that made people question whether the universe had any order at all. That Danny had been only 17 then, and John had raised him through the rest of high school, through college, through the first few years of his 20s. He was doing so well, John said, refilling their wine glasses. They'd moved from coffee to wine somewhere around hour 2, and James had texted his brother Sam to let him know he wouldn't be home until late. He had a job he loved, graphic design for a small firm downtown. He had an apartment, friends, a life. And then one night he was at a party, someone offered him something and he said yes, just that simple, one yes, and everything changed. Addiction isn't simple, James said, you know that. I do, doesn't make it hurt less. John leaned back against the counter, cradling his wine glass. What about you, do you have family in the city? A brother, Sam, he's a journalist, freelance, mostly investigative work. He's currently embedded with a group documenting the housing crisis. James smiled, thinking of his perpetually disheveled, endlessly energetic younger brother. He's brilliant and reckless and gives me heart palpitations on a regular basis. Sounds like you love him very much. I do, even when he's driving me crazy, which is most of the time. James paused, then found himself continuing. We're not close the way some siblings are. I think I disappoint him sometimes. I'm too cautious, too rigid. He's always pushing me to take risks, open up, live a little, and I'm always telling him to slow down, think things through, consider the consequences. Someone has to be the responsible one. Maybe, or maybe I'm just scared. The wine had loosened something in James, made words come easier. I think that's what Sam really objects to, not that I'm careful but that I'm afraid, and he's right to object because I am afraid. Of getting hurt, of losing control, of needing people and having them disappoint me or leave me or die. John set his wine glass down and moved closer until they were standing near enough that James could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw. I'm afraid too. John said quietly, all the time. I'm terrified that everyone I love is going to leave. My parents died, Danny's gone, and I'm just waiting for the next loss, for the other shoe to drop. I help people process grief every day, but I don't know how to stop being afraid of it myself. You don't have to have all the answers. I'm supposed to, that's literally my job. You're allowed to be human, John. James said his name for the first time, and it felt significant somehow, like crossing a threshold. You're allowed to not be okay. John's breath caught. No one said that to me in a very long time. They stood in the quiet kitchen, something building between them, not just attraction, though that was there, humming beneath everything else, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe, the sense of meeting someone who understood the particular architecture of your loneliness because they'd built the same structure around their own heart. James knew he should step back, re-establish distance, remember why professional boundaries existed in the first place. But he was tired of should, tired of safe, tired of protecting himself from connection because connection meant risk. What do you want, John? James asked, his voice low. Right now, in this moment, what do you want? John's eyes searched his face, looking for something, permission, maybe, or confirmation that James was really asking what it seemed like he was asking. I want to not be alone, John finally said. I want someone to see me, really see me, not the counselor, not the responsible older brother who has everything together, not the guy who helps everyone else, just me. I see you, James said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. John's hand came up, hovering near James's face, not quite touching. Is this okay, can I? Yes. John's palm cupped his jaw, thumb brushing across his cheekbone, and James felt his breath stutter. He'd been touched before intimately, sexually, in all the ways two people could touch. But this felt different. This felt like being known. James, John whispered, and then he closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, questioning, careful in the way of two people who understood that they were standing at the edge of something significant. James's hand came up to rest on John's hip, feeling the warmth of him through the thin fabric of his Henley, and John made a sound low in his throat that sent heat spiraling through James's chest. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, and James felt years of carefully maintained control beginning to slip away. John's fingers threaded through his hair, bodies pressing closer, and James had the dizzying sense of falling into something he couldn't control and didn't want to. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, John pressed his forehead against James's. Tell me this isn't just me, tell me you feel this too. I feel it, James said, his voice rough with emotion and desire. I'm terrified of it, but I feel it. Good, John kissed him again, briefer this time, almost shy. I don't want to be the only one scared." They stood there for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, both trembling slightly with the magnitude of what they'd just acknowledged. "I should probably go," James finally said, though every part of him wanted to stay. "It's late and I have an early shift tomorrow, and if I don't leave now." "I know," John stepped back, creating space between them, though his hand lingered on James's arm. "I know it's fast, we should probably slow down, think about what we're doing." "Probably," James caught John's hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and exactly right. "But I don't want to slow down, I want to see you again, soon, is that okay?" John's smile was radiant. "Yes, that's very okay." Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and momentous. James would finish his shift at the precinct and find himself driving to Ashford Street without consciously deciding to go there. John would be waiting, sometimes with takeout from the Thai place on the corner, sometimes with ingredients for dinner that he'd attempt to cook with varying degrees of success, once with nothing but a bottle of wine and a confession that he'd had a terrible day and just needed company. They talked about everything. John told him about his clients, never by name, always maintaining confidentiality but sharing the patterns he saw in grief, the ways people surprised him with their resilience or broke his heart with their fragility. James talked about cases he was working, the frustrations of bureaucracy and politics within the department, the small victories that made the job worthwhile even when it ground him down. They talked about their first times, John's at 19 with a college roommate who kissed him during a study session and changed everything he thought he knew about himself. James's at 22 with a fellow cadet at the police academy, fumbling and nervous and perfect in its awkwardness. They talked about coming out. John's parents had been accepting, if a bit confused at first, more worried about whether he'd be safe than concerned about who he loved. James's father had stopped speaking to him for 2 years, only reconnecting after James made detective and could no longer be dismissed as just going through a phase. "He came to my promotion ceremony," James said one night, lying on John's couch with his head in John's lap, John's fingers running through his hair in soothing repetitions. "Stood in the back, didn't say anything to me directly, but he was there. My mom said it was his way of apologizing, of saying he was trying. I don't know if we'll ever be close, but at least we're speaking." "That must have been hard," John said softly, "losing him like that, even temporarily." "It was, but it also taught me something important, that I could survive being rejected by someone I loved, that their disapproval didn't change who I was." James turned his head to look up at John. "I think that's when I started building the walls. If I didn't need anyone, if I didn't let anyone close enough to hurt me, then I'd be safe." "Are you safe now?" John asked, his fingers stilling in James's hair. "No," James admitted. "I'm terrified, but I'm also happier than I've been in years, so I guess terror and happiness aren't mutually exclusive." John smiled down at him. "No, they're really not. They didn't sleep together, not yet." It wasn't a conscious decision so much as an unspoken understanding that they were building something, and rushing it might crack the foundation before it had time to set. But the sexual tension was always there, humming beneath every conversation, present in every lingering touch, every kiss that ended before it could go too far. James would leave John's apartment in the early hours of the morning, wound tight with want, and drive home with his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering him to earth. He'd lie awake in his own bed, thinking about the curve of John's mouth, the sound he made when James kissed his neck, the way his breath hitched when James's hands slipped beneath his shirt. He wanted John with an intensity that bordered on overwhelming. But he also wanted to do this right, to build something that would last beyond the initial rush of chemistry and attraction. 3 weeks after they'd met, John invited James to Danny's funeral. "It's Saturday at 2, John said, his voice careful like he was afraid of the answer. "At Riverside Chapel. It'll be small." Danny didn't have many friends left at the end. Most of them had either moved on or were still using, and he was trying to avoid those triggers. He paused. "I don't know if I can do this alone, would you? Could you be there if you're not working?" James didn't hesitate. "I'll be there, I'll make sure I'm not scheduled." "You don't have to." "I want to," James interrupted. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." John's eyes filled with tears and he quickly looked away, swiping at them with the heel of his hand. "Sorry, I don't know why I'm crying. I haven't been able to cry since you first told me. It's like everything's been locked up inside and I can't access it." "That's normal, grief doesn't follow a schedule." "I know, I tell my clients that all the time." John laughed wetly. "It's just different when it's your own grief, you know. I can't seem to take my own advice." James pulled him into an embrace and John collapsed into it, face pressed against his shoulder, breathing hard like he was trying to hold back sobs. They stood like that for a long time, James's hand moving in slow circles on John's back, until John's breathing evened out and he pulled away. "Thank you," John whispered, "for being here. For not telling me I need to be strong or that everything happens for a reason or any of the other platitudes people say when they don't know what else to offer. You don't need platitudes, you need someone to hold you while you fall apart. Is that what you're doing, holding me?" "For as long as you need," James brushed a strand of hair from John's face. "I'm not going anywhere." The funeral was exactly what John had predicted, small, quiet, and heartbreaking in its simplicity. James stood near the back of the chapel, watching John deliver the eulogy with a composure that seemed almost superhuman. His voice never broke, his hands never shook as he gripped the podium, but James could see the cost of that control in the tightness around his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders, the way he never quite looked at the casket at the front of the room. "Danny was more than his addiction," John said, looking out at the handful of mourners, mostly people from John's life. James realized friends and colleagues who'd come to support John rather than because they'd known his brother. He was funny and stubborn and impossibly kind. He had this laugh that was completely infectious, this full-body laugh that made everyone around him want to laugh too, even if they didn't know what was funny. He loved terrible action movies, the kind with impossible physics and ridiculous plots, and he'd defend them passionately to anyone who'd listen. He made the best chocolate chip pancakes you've ever tasted. They were crispy on the edges and fluffy in the middle, and he had this secret ingredient he'd never tell me. John's voice wavered for the first time, and James felt his chest tighten. "He deserved better than the disease that took him," John continued, his voice gaining strength again. "He deserved all the years he didn't get, all the chances he won't have, all the laughter and love and stupid action movies and perfect pancakes. We all deserve better, and the only way I know to honor his memory is to keep showing up for ourselves, for each other, for all the people still fighting battles we can't see." Danny fought for 8 months, he fought hard. And even though he lost this battle, his fight still matters, he still matters. When John stepped down from the podium, his eyes found James's across the chapel, and the relief and gratitude in that look made James understand viscerally why he was here, why this mattered, why letting himself care about this man was worth every risk. After the service, as people offered their condolences and drifted away, James found John standing alone by the casket, one hand resting on the polished wood. "Hey," James said softly, coming to stand beside him. John looked up and his carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "I can't believe he's gone. I keep thinking he's going to call me tomorrow morning at 7 like he always did, and we'll talk about his day and mine, and he'll tell me about whatever movie he watched last night. But he won't. He's never going to call me again." "I'm sorry," the words felt inadequate, but they were all James had. "I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently, all the times I could have visited more, called more, been more present. What if I'd checked on him that week? What if I'd known something was wrong? What if—" "Stop," James said gently, turning John to face him. "You can't save people who aren't ready to be saved, and even if they are ready, sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes the disease wins anyway. That's not your fault. Everyone keeps saying that, but it doesn't make it true." "It is true, but I also know that knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things." James took John's hands in his. "Come with me, please, let's get out of here. You don't have to be strong anymore today." "Where?" "Anywhere, the beach maybe, or just drive. I don't care where we go as long as you're not here trying to hold yourself together for other people." John looked around the chapel, at the casket, at the flowers, at the few remaining mourners, and nodded. "Okay, yes, let's go." They drove to the coast, an hour north of the city, and walked along a beach that was nearly deserted in the cold January air. The ocean was steel gray and restless, waves crashing against the shore with a rhythm that felt both violent and soothing. The wind was sharp and cold, carrying the taste of salt and distance, and John breathed it in like it was medicine. "I used to come here with Danny," John said, hands shoved deep in his pockets as they walked. "When we were kids, before everything got complicated, our parents would rent a house here for a week every summer, and Danny and I would spend all day on the beach, building sandcastles, swimming until our lips turned blue, staying up late to catch fireflies." "What was he like then, before?" John's expression softened with memory. Fearless, he'd climb anything, try anything, drag me into all kinds of trouble. I was the cautious one, always worrying about consequences, making sure we didn't do anything too reckless. He lived entirely in the moment, no past, no future, just now. His smile faded. I think that's what made him vulnerable later. He never learned to think ahead, to see the danger before it was too late, or maybe he saw it and didn't care, I don't know. James picked up a smooth stone and sent it skipping across the water, 1, 2, 3 bounces before it disappeared beneath the surface. My brother Sam is like that, always chasing the next big story, throwing himself into dangerous situations because he believes the truth matters more than his own safety. He's been to war zones, disaster areas, places where journalists regularly get killed or kidnapped. He laughed without humor. I spend half my life terrified that I'm going to get the call, the one I made to you, telling me something's happened to him. But you love him. Of course, he drives me absolutely crazy, but yeah, I love him more than almost anyone. That's the thing, isn't it? John stopped walking and turned to face the ocean, wind whipping his hair across his face. Love doesn't protect anyone, it just makes you vulnerable, makes you care desperately about things you can't control, people who make choices you can't influence. It's terrifying. Would you rather not feel it? John considered this, really considered it, and when he answered, his voice was thoughtful. No, even now, even with all this pain, I'd rather have loved Danny than never known him at all. I'd rather have had those summers at the beach, those 7 a.m. phone calls, those terrible action movie marathons. Even knowing how it ended, I wouldn't trade the love. James understood that in a way he couldn't quite articulate. He'd spent so long avoiding exactly this kind of connection, convincing himself that independence was strength, that not needing anyone meant he couldn't be hurt. But standing here with John, watching the way grief and love intertwined in his expression like threads in fabric, James realized that maybe strength wasn't about not needing anyone. Maybe it was about being brave enough to need someone anyway. Can I tell you something? John asked, still facing the ocean. Something I haven't told anyone. Always. I'm scared. John's voice was barely audible over the waves. I'm scared that everyone I love is going to leave. My parents died, Danny's gone, and I feel like I'm just waiting for the next loss, bracing for it. I help people process grief every day, teach them coping strategies, tell them it's okay to be afraid, but I don't know how to stop being afraid myself. James moved closer, eliminating the space between them until they stood shoulder to shoulder, both facing the restless ocean. You don't have to stop being afraid. Fear means you have something to lose, something worth protecting. Is that what you tell yourself when you're afraid? I don't let myself be afraid, or I didn't until recently. James turned to look at John. You've changed that. You've made me care about something more than my job, more than staying safe, and it's terrifying, but it's also the most alive I've felt in years. John met his eyes and something shifted in his expression, a softening, an opening, a decision being made. I don't want to be afraid anymore, not of this, not of you, not of what we could be. What do you want? I want someone to see me, really see me, not the counselor, not the responsible older brother who always has it together, not the guy who helps everyone else process their pain. Just me, messy, complicated, grieving me. I see you, James said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. John's breath caught, and then he was kissing James, desperate and deep, hands fisting in James's jacket, all the control he'd maintained throughout the day finally shattering. James kissed him back with equal intensity. Hands sliding into John's hair, tasting salt from the ocean spray or maybe from tears, he couldn't tell. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, John pressed his forehead against James's. Take me home, please, I don't want to be alone tonight. You won't be, James promised. Not tonight, not any night you don't want to be. They walked back to the car hand in hand, and when James drove them back to the city, John fell asleep against the window, his hand still loosely intertwined with James's on the console between them. James couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this kind of peace or this kind of purpose.